What's up, guys? Welcome to part 3 of our Tumbler engraving course. In this video, it's going to be super quick, right? We're just going to talk about measuring. I see a lot of questions about this online and a lot of misinformation going around, a lot of people trying their best to help, but just giving information that might not be right. So what we're going to cover today is how we measure tumblers for engraving and the correct way to do so and where you're going to measure from, all the good stuff that goes in with that. If you haven't checked out parts 1 and 2, feel free to go back and check those out. Again, links will be provided in the description here to access the other videos in this series, as well as our website where we offer a ton of Tumbler content and a bunch of helpful things like setting sheets and Tumbler templates and all of that to help you get started, as well as some sources for blanks and designs and jigs and accessories that make it easier. So let's get into measuring. I see questions all the time. Where do I measure? It's different on the top and bottom. Don't understand. Let's start with 40 ounce. 40 ounce is the most popular size that I'm seeing people ask questions about. To measure this, there are 2 ways you can do it. You can grab some calipers or tape and you can measure the diameter. The diameter is being the distance from one side to the other. I don't recommend doing that. I've never found it to be more accurate or more simple than just measuring the circumference, which in xTool they call it the perimeter, but it's actually the circumference of the tumbler itself. So what we're going to do is grab a flexible measuring tape and measure around the tumbler. Now, before I even do that, let me show you this measuring tape. This isn't xTool's measuring tape, but it is one that's very similar to xTool. So right here, you'll notice where that 3 is, for example, or where that 2 is with that middle line. That's not actually 20 millimeters. That is 15. 20 is this line that goes across the bottom. This line where the 3 is, that's 25. 30 is this big line that goes across the bottom. Pay attention to your measuring tape. I have both types here in the shop. Some that actually the 3 is across from where 30 is, somewhere they break like this. So it's really important to pay attention to what type of tape measure you have. And I'll also go on my soapbox a little bit about measurement units. I'm all about freedom units, but I use millimeters when lasering. It's more accurate. It's easier to change around. It's easier to work with. Use millimeters and thank me later. If you don't know how to change to millimeters in your software, it is very simple. There is a button up at the top left. You will click that. You will then find your settings, and then you will find the units and switch it to millimeters. We will probably do a quick little short on how to do that if that's helpful, but it is very simple. Switch your units in xTool's Creative Space or xTool Studio, depending on what you're using, into millimeters, and it will go a long way. Back to measuring. When you measure a 40 ounce, measure the top, right? You're going to measure all the way around the outside. I already know that this is going to be 315 millimeters, but we're going to go ahead and measure it for the sake of the video. So when we measure this all the way around, let's pull the extra, and we'll turn this around to you guys. We'll pull it tight, and where that crosses there is 315 millimeters. So it's right at where the 32 is, which actually, as we talked about, is not 320. It's actually 315. So this is going to be 315 millimeters around. That's going to be your diameter or your circumference, excuse me. And that's the number that you're going to put into the perimeter box in the xTool software. We'll show you how to set all that up in the later video. This one's just about measuring. And that's also what you're going to do for your template. So I'll share the templates again, but just know that's how you would, the number you would use to start making your own template as well. Now, you also want to measure how big you're going to engrave here. So this depends on your design. If you're engraving something with just a one-sided logo or they just want the top, then you're just going to measure from the top engravable area, which is directly below this line or at this line where the plating starts, down to the start of that taper. That's 130 millimeters, maybe 135 if you want to play it a little short. It's about 132 to be exact, but so you'll measure from here to here. If you want to go a full wrap and you want to go all the way down, it should be 235 millimeters. We're going to measure it just to be careful. And this one is actually like 236. So this one's a little taller than standard for a dupe. What I've found for most popular measurements are 235 for dupes, 236.5 for Stanleys. In terms of height, they're all 315 millimeters around. And that's important to know the difference based on what you're doing and whether you want a millimeter and a half gap at the top of your tumbler or not. You'll also notice that sometimes tumblers are a slightly different size. So if you get a new batch of tumblers in and you want to double check, just measure the first one you put on. Super easy. For things like this 20 ounce, where you'll see like it's definitely larger at the top, it's definitely smaller at the bottom. I would still measure the top, right? At the end of the day, the way this works is as long as your circumference or your circumference of the item is adding up to the perimeter that you put in xTool, you should get similar results, and it shouldn't really matter whether you measure here or here. But just as a best practice, I always measure pretty much the widest part, except in very specific circumstances, like if I'm doing the center of a wine glass, right, and it's a super tapered wine glass, then in that case, I would maybe measure the area of exactly where the engraving's going. So if the engraving was going here, I might just measure that and do it off of that number. But typically, I go ahead and just measure all the way around the top. This one should be 280, and it is right there at 280. And then you'll measure the height. And again, the height depends on what you're engraving. So we talked about this in the last video with these fluted tumblers. If you're engraving all the way down, right, you're going to measure all the way down to really where this base is, because you don't want to engrave this bottom part. That would be 140, which is what most 20-ounce tumblers are. They're 280 by 140. But if we didn't want to go that far and we wanted to stop above the fluting, then we're going to change that, and we're going to go to about 108, 107-ish. So you can look right there and see where that kind of stops, right below the 110 mark. So it really just depends on what you're measuring. Same thing for these other tumblers. These are pretty straightforward. It's the same all the way around. So you're just going to measure around. It should give us about 250, if I remember correctly. Yep, 250. And then if we measure up and down, it should give us 125 on a 16-ounce can. And yep, we're right there at 125. So measure it, learn it, remember it if you want. Keep a chart, make templates, and we'll show you how all of that goes into making templates here in just a moment. But to answer all the people's questions that I see online about how to measure tumblers, where to measure, how this works, hopefully this answers that question so we can get measuring tumblers out of the way. And in the next video, we're actually going to go into what those numbers mean, how to make templates out of them, how to put your designs within those templates, and how to get everything ready for engraving on the software itself, which for what we'll be using will be xTool Studio. However, xTool Creative Space functions very similarly. All right, thanks you guys for tuning in. Again, check out the links in the description and look out for the next part of this series, and we'll catch you in the next one.